today, and we will also catch up on the second learning outcome on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay?
That'll be great.
Okay.
At least
I'm going to try and push it, because I think what I don't want to see happen in the short term is that, because you're obviously in a new job, you have certain set of challenges that you're already dealing with. I don't want you to be in a position where you kind of decide, okay, I'm going to put this course on hold, because for us, completion numbers are important. And you've started on this journey, you've done one unit. I want to, even if we do 1 or 2 sessions, in the week, that is still okay, as long as you're able to, cope with the level of work, so that you're able to submit. So after this unit, when I've done this particular unit, then you're going to be looking at 1 or 2 other units, which will be taught by my colleague Anjum. And we do a lot of teaching on weekends as well. So if you tell me in advance, keeping in mind everything is going to be slowing down for Christmas, we are looking at kind of taking a bit of a break, from the 22nd of the month, December, not now, 22nd of December, up until the 6th of January. Okay. So there'll be a time wherein, if you're available, apart from the usual days of, the Christmas Eve and, the Boxing Day and all those things, we would be able to do a bit of catch up on some sessions to, specifically with you, to kind of speed up the delivery of some of the units. Is that okay? That's fine. That's good. So let's kick off with this particular unit, which is looking at the development of tourism and hospitality industry in general. And I think this unit, we are looking at picking up the first learning outcome, which is to look at understanding factors, which affect the development of this industry in general. So I've got a few set of slides here that I'm going to go through with you and give you some background. Now, in the UK, if we look at specifically, I put some footnotes in. This industry is growing quite fast, and I think after Brexit, it is also predicted that a lot of people will look at coming to UK separately as against the package tours that they take. When people are visiting Europe, so they look at going to Paris, they look at going to London, and 1 or 2 other destinations. So it's normally a package tour. You get 2 days in London, 1 day in Edinburgh, and you go to Paris and other bits and pieces. But this sector is also slated to grow, because if we come out of the EU, at some stage, I think after the transition period is over, there'll be visas which will be required. And that would mean that if people are planning to visit UK in general, they would want to stay in UK for a couple of days, not just visit London, but go to other cities as well. Yeah. So when we look at, the industry in general, up until last year, this industry is about £46 billion in terms of contribution to the GDP and obviously creation of jobs. And they have directly, it has about 2.4 million jobs related to this particular sector. And it's the 5th largest employer as far as UK, geography is concerned. Okay. Now, there are some direct jobs and there are some ancillary jobs. So if I look at ancillary jobs, 1.2 million indirect jobs are also supported by this particular sector. So this is very important. And I think one of the reasons why I want to look at a good deal with Brexit is that it will also define the shape in which some of these policies in terms of visa systems and other things will also pan out when we look at travel between the EU and the UK and the UK and the EU in terms of other countries. Now, let's understand how this whole concept started in terms of development. Now, in the olden days, people define tourism as basically some sort of a temporary movement. That means you move from one location to the other, and at some stage you went back after doing a number of activities. And this used to be primarily, kind of defined as tourism for a particular reason. If I go back 3 or 4 decades back, when air travel was not that frequent, what we did see was a lot of these activities were primarily happening because of religious reasons. So people used to go on some voyages and, visit far off distant relatives and things like that, because travel wasn't very frequent. So they always planned these activities for a longer duration of time. Right. And that meant that if I was going to my cousins, maybe in the 1960s or 70s, and you were flying out, even if you're, taking a flight or you were going by train or by road, you planned your holidays, vacations, stay for about 2, 3, 4 months. So they were longer durations because of the amount of travel and money and other things required to undertake this activity. But over the years, what is a standard definition which is now come about is a definition which the United Nations World Trade Organization or Travel Organization has actually put forward. And it says that people who undertake activities for a certain number of months or periods, but then go back to their usual place of dwelling, is then termed as tourism.
Okay.
So if I look at giving an example, is that so if I work as an expat, I work for a company and I get transferred over from one location on a project to another location for a certain period of time, 3 months, 6 months, up until 12 months, that will still be classed under tourism because I'm not going to be living permanently out of that location. Okay. I'm not going to become a native or a local resident of that location. So any such activity which was done for a period of up to 12 months or not more than 12 months, but involves you to travel and undertake a lot of activities which could be for religion, for income, for pleasure, tourism, things like that, would be then classed as in general the activity of tourism. Okay. Now, that has what has led to the development of the concept of tourism and hospitality management. So people normally tend to travel for various reasons. The most important reason, which if you ask somebody, is that when people say, okay, I need a vacation, I need to go on a holiday, it's because of the the routines that they go through on a day-to-day basis in their lives, in their personal lives, professional lives. At some point in time, they decide that, okay, I need to get out of this routine. And in order for me to get out of this routine, I need to travel to another destination, go away from where I normally stay, live, to the usual set of activities. And that tends to stick with all the related activities which are created around this industry, which basically look at the aid and development of basically tourism in any location. Now, if I look at some historical developments, in terms of when we look at historical developments, we look at the say for example the Middle Ages, we look at time before that, and then we look at the modern age of travel and tourism, which has emerged in the early 1900s. We do see that if I go back into the history, the Egyptians had their own way of spending holidays or vacations. They used to travel outside, have passages through which the royalty could actually travel and take vacations or go outside and learn and experience new cultures. That slowly and gradually over the years it has evolved, primarily to look at reasons of when I say in particular, let's put it this way, how people travel. So in the earlier days, the travel was primarily done through the route of sea. In some cases, it was the land. But as we see different forms of travel emerging, especially when we look at road travel, train travel, airline travel, what we've seen is that this as an activity has become quite usual or quite frequent, and a lot of people are able to undertake this activity because of the fact that they are economically able to now afford this. And at some point in time, this activity is then taken out for different reasons. So when we relate this to the previous unit that we studied, when we look at events, a lot of these activities are now taken for business reasons, which is for pleasure, for training, development, meeting, conferences, and things like that. But if I look at it from a personal context point of view, from a public context point of view, what we do see is that these activities are primarily done for 3 or 4 main reasons. There could be activities that you take for leisure. You undertake this activity for primarily, visiting a new place or a location, visiting a friend or family. And last but not the least, you basically undertake this activity also for religious reasons. And that is where the history actually comes from in terms of how the history of tourism has evolved over the ages. So when we look at the previous slide, talks about, the Egyptian travelers traveling because of, things like wars. So they became settlers, So the Romans, when they looked at trying to conquer Egypt, they became settlers in Egypt. Or, obviously, so some part of these activities at that point in time were done from a different reason, but allowed the people to travel to far and distant locations, and they then became travelers to a certain extent because some of them either got left behind, started life, restarted life in those locations, and some of them traveled back, and that is where the concept of actually tourism, comes about. Now, if you throw something into the mix, which is in terms of money, when money and transaction related things started to happen, which is trade essentially. Tourism became more important is because this then meant an opportunity for the elite to travel to far and distant places on the pretext of trade, but primarily for tourism. Right? So this meant that the trade also led to a lot of tourism related activity because the elite was able to travel and they couldn't part away with the money, and they basically thought that, okay, if we look at going for trade, it also could be an outcome leading to some sort of a travel or a vacation.
Yeah.
This also led to, if you see one aspect of this, is this also led to a lot of historians or people who were basically doing a lot of research, writing the history, writing the books, to travel to different destinations to learn about cultures. And again, it started from an aspect of the learning, the desire to learn about different cultures, which led to them traveling and documenting some of these travels and voyages, which we do read in the history today.
Okay.
So again, this led to an increased interest in the travel and tourism activity. And this, at some stage, transformed from being just for trade or just for, say, battle purposes or military or, those conquest purposes, to turning slowly and gradually, turning the tide to basically commerce related and pleasure related. That means for vacation or holiday related travel. And I think when we look at studying the history of tourism, we look at dividing it into, 3 or 4 eras. So you look at the Middle Ages, you look at, the early 16th to the mid 17th century, just before the Industrial Revolution came in, and some of the, when some of the major inventions primarily started to occur, things like the electricity, the rail engine, and the modernization of the transportation routes started to happen. And then the last bit was because of the Industrial Revolution, when the system of roads, railways, and other things began to happen, and other forms of transport emerged, which is things like, basically the air transport, sea transport, which could become commercial in the nature. That is where we do see the development of, tourism activity happening quite rapidly, in that time frame. And that time frame is called the mobility era. So the time between the 1800s to the 1944s is the time wherein there was a lot of development which started to happen, led to economic prosperity, and that economic prosperity at some point in time, led to the increased, travel and leading to this development of, tourism in general. So after the 1945s, we see what we see in the present generation. Say, for example, our parents and our forefathers, what we see is the present generation wherein we have now literally seen the shaping up of the tourism activities happening, and all forms of transport leading or aiding the tourism activity across the globe. And specifically after World War II, when some of the things like when you look at the airplane, which was invented primarily by the Germans and, for war reasons, found commercial use and led to the creation of aviation industry in general. Some of these things, happened after World War II. And what it did was it shortened the travel time to time which was not across days, but across a few hours.
Yeah.
And this led to the development of mass tourism. So if you have to answer a question, or if I have to ask you a question that what led to the development of modern tourism, the answer should undoubtedly be, transportation. But what kind of transportation? We look at railways and we look at air travel in particular, which shortened the time, from a number of weeks and months and weeks to essentially days to essentially hours. And that is what led to the development of, so what we call, tourism, mass tourism. So I think somebody asked me this question in one of the sessions last year or earlier this year, was that, is there a fixed number in terms of number of people which travel for tourism? What is the number? So I think 1.2 billion people travel every year just for primarily leisure and tourism activity. So they take a structured vacation once or twice a year. They travel for 5 to 7 days, 10 to 12 days, depending on the duration and the location. But these are the number of people who are economically able to now travel and take a holiday and travel across to a different destination, not from their own from their own place of stay, which is the city, to a different country or to a different location. Okay, let's look at another aspect. How do we bring tourism in terms of into some sort of a focus? So when I say focus, what I mean here is that what are the typical reasons why people want to travel, and that travel is then covered under the definition of tourism in the modern day context. So this tends to be when you take a vacation. When we use the word vacation, we look at visiting friends. We look at leisure trips. So this could be both official trips. That means you're going on behalf of an organization to visit a location, attend a business meeting, but then it kind of extends into a bit of a small vacation wherein you take a day off, 2 days off, and visit the location and then come back and start your usual work. And these could be when you're doing the MICE in particular, when we talked about meeting incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. They tend to be from a personal, not from a personal, but from a business and professional reason. They tend to be also classed under the reasons why tourism has increased or tourism is increasing day by day. So the other reasons that we can think of would be, in some cases, is that when we look at you visiting friends and family, or you visiting certain locations to experience the culture, meet with someone. So in our case, when we look at a present example that I would give is like Prince Harry and Meghan, when they traveled to their first official tour to Australia, and they went across to meet the old traditional people, and in New Zealand they met the Maoris in particular. So this was maybe to go and experience a different culture, but not from an official capacity of visiting as the head of state or as for example the ambassador of the head of state. No, this was more to look at experiencing the culture and also spending some time as as tourists. So those are also reasons which can be kind of dovetailed with official, personal, professional reasons, but they then allow you to actually go into a particular location and contribute towards tourism activities. Is that okay? So I think in a few slides that we've covered so far, what I've tried to give you a bit of a background is that what is the historical development and what is the nature through which tourism has evolved as a sector, and what is where the history lies. So if I have to look at 4 phases, that is what officially is recognized in terms of where the growth of tourism or activity has taken place. But the modern day tourism actually started from the post-World War II era, and that primarily has been after 1945, and this is due to the advances in transportation, whether be it rail transport, but in particular aviation or air transport. Now, let's look at understanding from a different perspective, what are the technological impacts, or the economical impacts that this activity now has on the community or the broader community, and how do these things play into the mix. So when we look at innovation in technology, when we look at, for example, the advancements which are happening in technology, when you look at the era pre-1995, when there was no internet, if you went out, you had the usual, DSLR or the, cameras which used to take the usual photographs, and what you used to do was get them developed in the studio. And then if you had to share it with your friends and family, you used to actually send the actual prints across in the post, because there was nothing called the internet. So technology, when we look at, has also impacted this sector, but in a very good way. So what has happened is, as the internet became available in the 1995, and it started to, advance in terms of the speed, and more population, had access to it. Things like after the mid 2000s, when you had the things like Facebook coming in, it became easier for people to share their experiences using the internet with their friends and family. So technology in a lot of ways has changed tourism, is because it allows you to capture moments, it allows you to look at bookings, it allows you to reach out to vendors, hotels, and packages, airline companies, to be able to use this and do direct bookings. The diminished role of the travel agents, for example, or the tour operators, in example. If you see now, travel agents pretty much, we are seeing them disappearing. It's more the term which is tour operators now, because the tour operator not just manages your stay, your hotel, your transport, but also looks at, how you will travel. So as you see, there's a gradual evolution of the concept of, from travel agents to tour operators. And to a certain extent, this has also been facilitated by, technology. So you see now, a couple of years back, if you look at, you wanted to book something, you were only able to contact somebody during the opening hours of 10 to 5, 9 to 4, 9 to 5:30, things like that. But now, because of the internet and technology, you have 24 hours switched on ability to be able to, take on these hours and obviously, do these bookings or do these conversations and, checkouts, because technology has enabled those things to happen. So things like images, things like video, things like internet, online reservation. You look at social media and the impact it is having. You look at Facebook, Twitter, microblogging. These are things which are advancements which have allowed technology to positively impact the travel and tourism sector. Now, let's look at one particular slide which I put forward is there are lots of, when you used to do about, say, 20 years back, when you used to do hotel bookings, the tour operator, the travel operator had to physically call the hotel on your behalf and book the rooms, because there was no centralized reservation system available through which they could look at availability. And the only way to make sure that that was possible was they had to call the hotel up or the resort up to do a physical reservation, as far as the booking is concerned. Now, over the years, there are lots of different systems which have been introduced which allow centralized ticketing, centralized reservation, and this then allows tour operators now present today, even in some countries, travel agents today, to be able to look at unutilized capacity and do the bookings for their customers. So one such system which is broadly used by a lot of popular hotel chains, resorts, is Amadeus. Now this system basically is a centralized booking and reservation system. Once you have the access to this system as a travel operator, as a tour operator, you're able to see the unutilized capacity in terms of rooms, in terms of seating capacity, airline capacity, and then it can allow you to, do instant bookings as you do today on the, using the internet. So if you want to book a flight with Ryanair, you do not go to a travel agent. You go to the Ryanair's website or EasyJet's website. Go in, you're able to see actual availability. You're able to choose your seat, pay for it, and then, you book that seat and that booking confirmation is done. So this is, again, because of the possible good impact of technology and the development of software. So there are a couple of other softwares which are available, but one such centralized system which has become very popular and is used by businesses, hotels, resorts to look at booking and information availability to a lot of customers across the globe is Amadeus. And this is what kind of highlights the significant impact of technology which it is having on the tourism sector. Let's look at, in one or two slides, what are the economic impacts. Now, the World Travel Organization actually says that one of the top 5 export categories today in most of the developing countries is tourism, because this allows for the exchange or flow of money to happen, an exchange of money to happen across different countries. So if I travel from the UK to, say, Switzerland, we're going to be exchanging pounds for euros. That would mean the forex and the currency actually changes hands, and this drives jobs, growth, some sort of, let's put it this way, work in that particular economy, because people then come across for a different location, spend money in a particular location that they're visiting, and that allows this sector to flourish. And obviously it creates a lot of different types of jobs, direct or indirect jobs, but it creates jobs. The other thing that we do get to see is that when we look at putting this into a bit of perspective, now what the World Travel Organization also says is that 11% of global workforce, you work in with any sector, but 11% of that workforce today is getting jobs within this particular sector. So economically, travel and tourism is good for countries. It's good for economies, because when people travel, they travel, and when they are traveling, that would mean the monetary aspect of it leads to exchange of money or transactions that creates business, That creates opportunities for businesses, jobs for people in businesses, and in general allows about 11% of the global workforce to be employed within the sector.
Yeah.
Now, I think it will be foolish of me to say, or not be very, pertinent of me to say that when you look at governments introducing budget, they always look at tourism as a sector, because in most countries, tourism plays a very important part in terms of bringing in revenue from countries outside, bringing in basically foreign exchange. So in some cases, what you will look at is, in order to make sure that the tourism activity benefits the local economy or economy of a country, a lot of budgets, policies, legislation, when it is created keeping in mind the ability to be able to bring in people to visit a particular destination. So here, if you look at the example of Olympics, you look at big events, and I think we took that example during the events unit discussion, is that when you look at large-scale events, now these events require a lot of meticulous planning, and sometimes they require legislation to be introduced, because they are going to have a far-reaching impact as far as even for a shorter time period, but they will have a far-reaching impact in terms of jobs, creation of jobs, and also in terms of literally the money which flows into the economy when some of these events are happening.
Okay.
So when we look at the economic impact, I think it's quite clear. It's not very difficult to understand that why tourism is favorable as an activity, and why most governments across the globe actually promote this activity to increase tourism year on year, because this brings in a lot of forex or foreign exchange revenue, brings in money indirectly or directly into a lot of sectors.
Okay.
So you look at the Heathrow, expansion, for example, the third runway. Why do you think the government is, in spite of so much of I would say backlash from the locals in that area, in London in particular, when you look at environmental standards, things like that, they're still pushing ahead with the third runway, is because they know the economic viability, they know the economic prospects that the third runway will bring, and because that would allow more travelers in transit, or in general people to travel in and out of London, that would mean that more revenues will come in, and that would in general increase the economic activity for that area. So that is why, taxes, indirect receipts, when we look at, when you buy an airline ticket, you're paying some part of it, which is fuel duty, some part of it, which is going to the airline, but some part of it is direct taxes, which the government actually collects, because you're passing through that airport, or, the maintenance of those airports have to be done, security and things like that are actually paid through by those taxes. So it is in their interest, even if you're not traveling to UK, but you're en route or in transit to another destination, but because you're hitting that airport, at some stage you'll be paying some taxes, for landing into that airport, using those facilities, and flying off again. So that still brings in the indirect benefits of economic activity when you get increase in tourism. Is that okay? Okay, let's look at the third aspect in this task, which is talking about social impacts of tourism. Now, when we say social impacts, what do you mean by social?
Social impacts.
Yes. So basically, when we talk about, in general, the social impact of tourism, what we are basically talking about is the meaning of how certain activities of the organization will have an impact on the local or the larger community, or the culture, for example. So in this case, when I say social impact, it could be that, because of the increased prospects of economic activity, that would in general make the area more viable, because it will create more jobs. More jobs would mean, positive impacts. That means people have money in their pocket to spend. That would mean that the local economy would, be a more spending economy. People will have different types of things that they want to buy and sell, and that in general will kickstart the activity of trade. So one of the impacts which tourism directly has towards increasing economic status, or the economic viability of communities, is because of the fact that when people travel, they tend to spend, and when they tend to spend, take and use a lot of other services, things like transport, like you take a taxi service when you're traveling to London, you're staying at a hotel, you're visiting out to a number of places, and that would mean that if you visit a museum, you go to the London Eye, you go to some of the other places that you visit, you're actually spending money each step of the way, and that tends to increase, money in people's pocket. It tends to create jobs. It tends to create, larger level benefits, which then allow, people to have a better well-being as far as social aspect of the things is concerned. So if I relate this directly to some of the activities which happens with regards to tourism, is that, and a typical example would be, if you visit a particular location, you're on a holiday, you definitely go to a souvenir shop, or when you're at the airport, you go to the duty-free shop. Now that is basically to buy a souvenir. That is basically to, get a remembrance or some sort of a memory that you want to take away with you, that you visited this location. If I look at the social aspect of it, that if I relate it specifically to, say, religious travel, like the Pope visited Ireland a couple of months back, the Republic of Ireland. Now, when he visited, that was basically to reconnect with, people because of the scandals which the church has faced. And it was a bit of an atonement to ensure that these social traditions which people believe in are continued. And that then tends to kind of create a bit of richness, because the head of the, head of Vatican, the Pope, is actually traveling to a destination to do the atonements for sins which have been committed by the church in the past. So the social value of that is that it is looking at reviving some, say, lost traditions. It is looking at reviving or fostering, the faith in the church. And to a certain extent, it also looks at reviving faith and, the larger level effect of that within the community when he visits a particular country, on a trip like that. So the social aspects of, obviously social aspects of tourism basically benefit the communities, and they benefit it in different ways, which could be both in terms of, one of the things which is mentioned here, which is like conservation of art and culture. Sometimes you will see that, when we look at a lot of relics, which have like the pyramids and other bits and pieces that we look at in Egypt, a lot of travel sometimes happens from archaeologists and people related to archaeology in general, but they are traveling in terms of being able to offer the expertise from UK, from the US, from other developed countries, in order to ensure that the preservation of these, archaeological sites are done in a better way, which leads to the conservation of art and culture.
Yeah.
So that's a social aspect. A lot of countries collaborate on that, not from a monetary perspective, but when they look at sharing, when you see, I think the last which I visited, if I remember correctly, the Tutankhamun, kind of relics which came across from Egypt to the London Museum for a period of 1 year, and the idea was to, kind of apprise people or Londoners or in general the European, people of the culture, and the art and culture of the ancient Egyptians. And that was on a loan basis. So it goes back after a point in time. It travels to different destinations. But the idea is this is a social aspect of people connecting with their roots and connecting with different civilizations and cultures to understand, how things work at that point in time. Yeah. So that is what we look at when we look at, the cultural aspect of, tourism. Now, let's look at some of the other things. So let's look at, say, for example, what are the contemporary factors which affect the development of tourism? So we've understood the history. We've understood what changes can technology, economic viability, and social aspects or social changes can bring across, for tourism. Let's also understand what are the contemporary factors, can affect tourism, and how they affect this as an activity going into the future. So when we look at, the contemporary factors, these are, how do we define contemporary issues? Contemporary issues are ongoing issues that can be faced, which should not kind of die down. They can be faced over a point in time, and you need to find, short-term and long-term solutions to be able to resolve some of these issues.
Okay.
So when you look at contemporary issues in general for the travel and tourism sector, what you get to see is that these issues are not related to a particular type. They could be related to an event, could be an idea, could be an opinion or a topic which is relevant to the given situation on the present day. What I mean by that is that sometimes when you have to look at bringing changes into this particular side of the sector, which is tourism and hospitality, what you see is that some of the policies which are introduced by the government, some of the legislation which is introduced, can actually affect the businesses positively or negatively in this sector. An example of that I would give you would be, say, for example, when we look at the issue of carbon emissions. Now, we know that a lot of research now being put forward says that carbon emissions are done generally. The largest contributor to carbon emissions or global warming in general is pollution from vehicles, and even airlines are now, and the shipping which is happening, the transport of materials and goods via the shipping channels by sea is also a major contributor to creating pollution and or global warming or emission of carbon emissions and things like that. Now, this as an issue is an issue because the reason being it affects all the sectors. But what is happening currently right now is that if I look at it from a climate condition or climatic point of view, what we do get to see is that yes, these gases, the burning of fossil fuels involved in the transportation industry, which also kind of supports the tourism sector, leads to global warming, leads to rise in temperature, leads to rise in sea levels. Now, this could be an ongoing issue which could affect this sector going forward, because either we need to find a long-term solution for it, or we need to come out with alternatives which will actually sideline this issue or help us address the issue altogether. So the definition of being contemporary is the fact that it's an issue which is ongoing and can affect you today, tomorrow, and even in the long run. But this issue has to be dealt with not just solely by the travel and tourism sector, but also by other sectors which are involved directly or indirectly with regards to creating employment or opportunities within this sector. Now, another example that I would give you would be when we look at within this sector, the issue of when I say this is a contemporary issue, would be that if you see over the years, the costs have been going down. So, for example, the cost of travel 5 years back was higher than what is available today because of the budget airlines when they introduced travel, which was it's made travel more feasible. So Ryanair, for example, is making 465 million trips in terms of passenger trips across the year, which is far higher than what was probably 10 years back when the airlines and the affordability of airline tickets was not there with a lot of vast population. So this issue is a contemporary issue when we look at costs in particular. They're always trying to manage costs in terms of saving costs on the fuel, the duties, and also from competition. So it affects them in different aspects of when we look at costing for the airlines. So that's why this is also a contemporary issue. When you look at customer satisfaction, you look at customer satisfaction indexes, we look at, some hotel chains claim that we are rated 5-star, in customer satisfaction or in loyalty. Why do they look at not saying that, okay, we've achieved 5-star once and, our status should remain the same and our status should not change? But because there is a frequent churn in terms of the number of travelers or people staying in the hotel and then going out, checking out, staying, check out, check in, check out, this as an issue is an ongoing issue. So you could have the best 5-star rating from a set of guests which have stayed in the hotel in the month of, say, November, but this rating would go down to 2 stars if the customer service has not been maintained. So as an issue, this is an ongoing issue. It's a contemporary issue. So you cannot drop this ball in terms of, offering the best customer service or sticking to the processes and the procedures which have been defined, which will lead to the creation of best customer service. The moment you drop these and do not follow these processes and procedures, it leads to a significant or a direct drop in your customer satisfaction index or, the ratings that you get for hotels. So these issues in this sector are defined as contemporary issues. Now, when we look at issues like these, what are the factors which affect these issues? So when we look at the factors which affect these issues, they could be factors which are related to proper training, providing proper care, and in some cases, the quality of service which is being delivered for which you are actually paying for.
Okay.
So now we understand that, I hope now you understand that when we say what are issues, issues are customer satisfaction, issues are cost, issues are quality related, what the other competitors are doing, loyalty, these are issues. Now, what causes these issues is the slippage in terms of deliverance of quality, adhering to a particular quality, customer service, or training requirements, which if they are not met, then it leads to drop in levels of customer service. And that is why these are factors which specifically in this industry have to be looked at month after month, year on year, and I would say years on, to ensure that the quality does not drop, the customer service does not drop, and to a certain extent, the number of people actually coming to stay in terms of at the hotel not drop. Now, if it drops, you have a loss of revenue straight away. So it's directly consequential to the business that is running it, and you can see the revenues falling, or customers not staying in that hotel or in that resort because of these issues which have been faced. So these factors are addressed by a couple of things or a couple of solutions which the industry has to implement going further. So when you see health and safety trainings, they tend to be happening month on month for all the employees across this sector, because you cannot have a slippage in health and safety. If there's a fire, or if the procedures change, or if there is an untoward incident, then the first thing which comes in terms of the blame, if there's a loss of life or other serious things which would happen, then it falls down onto the health and safety. So you will see a lot of these places have regular drills on fire safety, on health and safety, and this is something which is maintained throughout the year. The other thing that you would look at is when you look at health and hygiene. So because a lot of these places in this sector serve food, beverages, or related items which are consumed, what tends to happen is that the health and hygiene certification for these premises is always kept up to date to negate some of these issues which could arise because of the nature of the business. So if you have a restaurant and you have these kind of places which offer food, what tends to happen is you will see that they have regular inspections, and these inspections come in and check these standards to ensure that if they have been given a particular rating, like a Michelin star rating, or for example, a rating, if they follow a rating scale, then they are able to deliver services at that rating scale, and they're able to maintain that rating. So due care is obviously taken in these cases to ensure that some of these factors which can affect the business or can affect this sector are not taken into, they do not basically create issues which can be ongoing, and that is how they need to address, some of these things when we look at factors affecting or creating the temporary issues. Now, this is one thing that we know very clearly, that people who work within this sector are quite stressed out, right? So when you look at chefs, they have very long shifts. You look at people who work in the laundry department or in the front office department, they have very long shift hours in terms of, their working hours. So sometimes you have people working during the night shift, they are given a rotation that they work 4 weeks in night shift and then 4 weeks during day shift, because it's done primarily in order for them to, kind of de-stress them or reduce stress that they could face, working in such, roles within this particular sector. One of the key things which we look at, which addresses this, is that when you look at travel, tourism, and hospitality sector, one of the biggest and the most strong departments of working within these organizations is human resource department. The reason why we look at human resource department is because the HR is primarily tasked with understanding and negating some of these issues even before they lead to some sort of, outcomes. So if you have, for example, somebody working in the front office and has been continuously doing night shifts, you have a customer who walks in, wants to stay at the hotel, or what tends to happen is you find the person sleeping at the front desk. What kind of impression that would give? You look at people which work within the laundry department, the restaurants, they normally go through a shift system because they need to kind of work less hours at certain point in time to be able to de-stress. And these are things which HR department puts into practice as far as this sector is concerned. Because if there is stress and if you have compromised performance, what tends to happen is it directly affects the quality related delivery of the service being provided by either a hotel or a resort or an airline industry. So you see in the airline travel, if you have long haul flights, the pilots are not allowed to fly beyond 20 hours, is because after that it could affect the delivery they do in terms of decision they take or decision making they do when they're flying an aircraft. Similarly is with air hostesses and airline crew. So if they are going on a long haul flight from say across the transatlantic, what they will do is they will go and the other batch will actually return in the other flight. So they will stay overnight. And these are done primarily to ensure that the quality levels which the resources provide do not drop below the level which has been defined in their quality management process or their quality management system. Stress also creates conflicts, and in order to not have these conflicts happening, sometimes you will see in the hotels, colleagues would talk amongst themselves. They would say, okay, can you look after that customer? I'm busy with somebody. And you will see the other person shrugging that is because of the fact they say, okay, why should I deal with it? It's your customer. You're at the front desk. I'm off now. So sometimes you will see these kind of conflicting situations also occurring. And that also happens because of the stress, created when you work long hours. And this is then taken care of by the, HR in general.
Okay.
Now, there are some bits which HR can take care of, but there are things which the management and the leadership team have to address within the organization in order to solve some of these long-term problems or contemporary issues. So if we see that there are some issues which are happening again and again, and these are happening in terms of, particular set of employees leaving a department and the HR having to recruit every 2 months, 3 months, then there are two things which come out, and this is where management and leadership step in to solve that issue. One is that the role and the position or the remuneration which is defined for that role is not adequate, and that is why you see a staff turnover happening. So a lot of people who work within the front desk end up leaving after 3, 4, 5 months is because they've had enough. They deal with customers firsthand, and then sometimes it's the attitude, the behavior of the customers which puts them off, and they decide that, okay, I want to move either to a back office or, I want to change in job.
Yeah.
And when these kind of issues tend to happen, the leadership has to step in to solve some of these on a long-term basis, and they can be resolved by things like the change of remuneration, change of shifts, change of the job responsibilities, and in some cases, the kind of incentives or emoluments which are given to employees who work within that roles. So we look at a holistic approach of understanding what are the contemporary issues, what factors affect these issues, and how they can be dealt with by looking at training, by looking at providing adequate training, looking at solving and identifying these problems even before they happen, which is the responsibility of the HR department, and that is one of the strongest departments, because it's customer service oriented, and this is something which, when we look at organizations within the THM sector, travel, hospitality, and management sector, what we do see is that they need strong people who are people oriented to be able to take up these roles and kind of discover or look at these problems even before they are occurring. And if they do to happen, then the leadership and management also have to take its part, and they have to then look at this from a long-term perspective of planning so that these issues can be avoided in the future. Okay. So that helps us cover the first bit, which is the learning outcome one, which is to understand the background of how this sector came about. Then we look at some of the other factors which affect this sector externally, which could be technology, economics of a particular country or a location, and what are the social impacts, the effects of social impact it can have on the economy in terms of the community. And last but not the least, we look at some of the clear reasons which are issues which can arise in this sector, why these issues arise, and how they can be resolved in particular, to take care of these problems or ongoing problems which can happen within this sector.
Yeah.
So in order to kind of, understand this in a bit more detail, what I've done is there are two handouts which are there on the system.
Okay.
And these two handouts basically talk about, one is in particular technology, and the thing that I have put across in the slide, which is the development of the centralized reservation system called Amadeus, has been taken from this particular handout. So this will give you a bit of understanding in terms of the effect technology has primarily on this sector. And the second handout that I have is looking at the social impacts, and this is from a research paper which was published, and it talks about in detail what are the social changes and the impacts it has on tourism in terms of modern society. So this particular thing will give you a bit of concise knowledge and information about the assessment criteria 1.2 and 1.3 in particular. The first part, which I feel, which is to look at more of history of tourism and the definition of tourism, is okay, and it's covered in a couple of these slides that we need to have an understanding of. Is that okay? Good stuff. So if you have any questions or if you need any further information, do drop me an email, and what we will do is catch up on Monday and do a discussion on learning outcome 2.
Okay. I have a question. It was about the just the style that I need to write in the format of my assignment.
Sure.
Outcome.
Sure.
Each.
Well, what I'll do is let me just quickly open that up, and we'll go through this now. Just have a brief look at it. So if you see, there will be a document which is primarily given, in the Moodle, which talks about the assignment brief. Now, if I look at going into the assignment brief, say for example, this particular unit, Unit 6 that we've started today. Now, as you can see, what it talks about is the same, the learning outcome and the assessment criteria that we actually see on the specification sheet. But the things begin to change when you look at going past this page. What you will see is that they put a bit of a scenario here, which says that you work as a junior tourism officer working for Visit England. Now, this gives you a bit of a context. So if I go across now to the Visit England website, it will give you the bits and pieces of information that you require to cover these tasks, which is being asked for you to do so. So one of the tasks that they're asking you to do is describe the key developments that have supported growth of UK tourism. So if I read this particular specification, which I put up here, in general, this, if I just expand this so that you're able to see, it talks about historical developments of leisure and tourism and hospitality industry. But the assignment task is actually asking you to focus just on the history of how, or maybe the timeline of how UK tourism and hospitality sector has actually developed. So it is asking you to do a timeline. Now, if I have to do this task, what I'm going to do is literally pick this up from here, go into a Word document, put this here, and then do essentially a timeline. I can do this in the bullet points, and I would say maybe write a few words here, like say I would start by just verbatim saying, during my research on Visit England website, I learned I learned about, say for example, the key developments of the growth of UK THM industry, right? And then what you would say is, I am summarizing them in the bullet points below. So what you do is you basically present that as a couple of bullet points, starting with the 1800s, the 1900s, the 1940s, and that basically shows the development of some sort of a timeline, and that would do that task. So this is basically, if you see here, this is AC 1.1. So rather than put this, I'll put 1.1 here. And I know clearly that this is what you're doing for this task. Now, when you go into the second task, you basically choose this here, which says a timeline should be accompanied with 200 words commentary describing contemporary factors. So this is going to address your task 1.3, contemporary factors. So I write 1.3 here, and then you discuss, some of the contemporary factors that we've discussed in the slide. So you're looking at writing about 200 words. So in these contemporary factors, you're picking up things like, ongoing issues, how they are created, what are the factors which affect these issues, and then maybe talking about briefly how these issues are resolved. Right? And then it says, for submission for this task, it says you have to do 1 in 2 timeline. That means you can do a timeline like a flowchart if you want to do, or you could do some bullet points. And the second is you're writing a commentary which covers these 2 tasks. So basically, in about 200 words, you're actually covering tasks, learning outcome 1 essentially. Right, give or take 200 plus minus 10%.
Yeah.
And then when you go to task 2, you've been asked to draw a mind map of tourism. Right. So the mind map of tourism is basically asking you to create, a poster or some sort of a flow chart which you can do, and that basically talks about what is the relationship between different organizations which work within the THM sector. Right. So here you could use a photo showing the whole mind map. You need to add some 2 closer photos if general. So if I'm a bit smart, to be honest, I'm going to try and do something, which is if I look at picking this up and I go and type on Google a mind map of THM organizations, in 9 out of 10 times you would probably get something which you can pick up and then explain in terms of how this mind map is working. So if you see, this is recipe planning, not something like, so you get an idea, general idea, this is like a mind map, right? But in order for you to create it, sometimes it requires specialist software. So if you can't create one, what I would suggest is like some of the other students have done, and I'll show you in this example very briefly. That would be that, they end up doing flowcharts or, boxes essentially to accomplish that task. And that would be good enough. So that should be absolutely fine. So it's something, as long as it conveys what you're trying to, put across and explain well, that would do. So this could be, say, this is actually a mind map, but you could do this using a PowerPoint presentation also. Not a problem. Okay. So if yeah, that's fine. Absolutely okay. So if you look at following this, I think it makes the job of doing the assignment quite easier because it is trying to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. One is, while doing this unit, it is asking you to develop some soft skills to be able to understand what kind of documentation is required to be produced. So if you have not done a mind map before, it actually allows you to create a mind map and you're learning something new as a skill. In some cases, it's asking you to do a poster. Now, you could do a poster on a Word document by choosing, Word, and you do new from a template. And if you type poster, it will give you an option to choose a poster template, as you can see. And it allows you to create a poster which can be done primarily to show the linkages of different types of organization. So this is to help you develop some skills. And if you see, these are things that you use in a day-to-day life when you work within an organization, business, or a company. Because sometimes you have to create outputs in terms of presentation, handouts, reports, which will be required for you to understand what is actually being asked for, but in a very short, summarized, descriptive manner, which can be circulated or shared across with colleagues or friends in the organization. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Good stuff. So I'm going to try and end the session here today, and then what I'll do is I'll catch up with you on Monday, and we'll go through learning outcome 2. If you can basically accept the invite, but in any case, now that you mentioned, we'll go ahead with it, on Monday as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.